let me introduce Dr. Sivaramakrishna Garu. Dr. P. Sivaramakrishna ji is the founder of an NGO called Shakti. He went to the tribal area of East Godavari as a teacher. He joined Usmania University for doctoral study on tribal knowledge systems. Later, he started NGO Shakti with his former students in Rampachodavaram. Shakti checked deforestation through public interest litigations, forced government to distribute the land records to tribals and conduct verification of encroachers. Shakti was engaged by the government to train barefoot land problem surveyors and also prepare customary boundary maps for recognition of the same under Forest Rights Act. Government entrusted to Shakti preparation of headmasters and headmasters handbooks for teaching tribal culture and training manuals for the members of Panchayat Raj institutions implementing PISA Act. The work of Sivaramakrishna ji, Telugu Girijana Sahityam, has been published by Sahitya Academy, Delhi. I should also share my own personal aspect with Dr. Sivaramakrishna Garu. He was the batchmate of my elder brother Bada Bhai, and because of that, I have always considered him to be my Bada Bhai. And I always remembered him as someone who used to come to Hyderabad to fight litigations in behalf of tribal people. When I met him in Hyderabad also, our meeting was in the context of his visiting the court for fighting the litigations in behalf of tribals only. Some of them were patent issues, some of them were land documentation and all that. So thank you very much, sir. My elder brother, thank you very much. Please, Dr. Sivaramakrishna Garu, please enlighten us with your vast experience of working among the forest dwelling people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nagbhushan Garu, for giving me this opportunity, and my colleagues, panelists, Somanaspati, Sachinarayana, and others. I speak particularly, I am a folklorist, so I did a lot of work on tribal culture. But in this present address, as already Nagbhushan Garu introduced, I elaborate on tribal revolts. Tribal revolts are known as their fight for Jal Jangal Jamin, that is land, forest, and water. So tribals are forest dwelling communities, and forests are in inaccessible areas. When British started intruding the areas, tribals revolted as usual, So then after subjugating the tribals, the British government introduced, a different kind of administrative system, which still today we are following. The same land records, cadastral maps, that is survey numbers. Every village, every piece of land has a survey number. Every forest, all forests are reserved. So reserve boundaries, and the reserve boundaries are notified by reserve blocks and compartments. All these things, and even for water also, they introduce localization, command area, catchment area, and all these things. All these things are totally new to the tribals. They don't know. They have a customary boundary maps, understanding, and they know local communities used to gather and resolve their problems. And it is local administration and local thing. When British entered, they opened the markets, land market. They encouraged land transfers. For that, they started land transfer registration offices. So when they started giving titles to the lands, so people started, purchasing lands, encroaching into lands, and which is Latin and Greek to tribals. First the British introduced the literacy culture, writing records, everything should be recorded. Tribals are known as, they are defined as pre-monetary, pre-literary, and prehistoric. Pre-monetary means tribals by and large follow barter system, and pre-literary, they don't have records, written records, and they don't maintain any written records. Only community will sit, decide, and that will be accepted by the community. No recording is necessary. And prehistoric, the so-called history of inscriptions, royal commands and all these things, they are not aware of all these things. So they are not familiar with all these things. In such a society, the British government introduced land records and all these things. And when land transfer is allowed, the purchasers, lowland people used to go there and purchase the lands, and they used to give loans. And so to realize the debt, they used to go to the court, get a decree, and attach the property. All these systems were introduced right in 1830 itself. So it is a threat to the jungle Jameen ownership of tribals. Tribals revolted, and every time, though they are subjugated, particularly in Andhra Pradesh, Rampa rebellion is very famous. From which area I work, started my work, Rampa area, that is Rampa rebellion, and later, it culminated into the martyr around one famous revolutionary who went to tribal area. He is Alluri Sitaramarazu in support of tribals. So this movement, of armed rebellion went on for nearly 200 years. Ever since British started intruding to tribal areas, they were against this system of titles, courts, and all those things. There is a famous saying, tribal can enter into the tiger's den, but he will not dare to enter into the court in Rajahmundry. That is the popular saying. So this was the situation. Even today, we don't know what is land record. They are not taught in the school education. We don't know the survey numbers. When we want to sell our property, then we find out survey numbers. So what is the survey number of our area? So community numbers and all these things, So in such a situation, tribal naturally resorted to armed rebellion. So it went on after 1935, by and large. The armed rebellions were suppressed, democratic process started. Democratic process, British introduced some kind of legislative system, legislative councils. They allowed elections and all those things, So on one side, the democratic process, like participating in elections and all those things, from 1920 it started, So electing some members, they become members of legislative councils and all those things, and satyagraha movements and non-cooperation movement. These are Gandhian movements, whereas tribal movements are armed revolts because they don't know all those things. They started, so opposing in a militant way, so with bows and arrows and all those things. So after independence, so what is ignored during the freedom struggle? This literacy of land records, this literacy of forest boundaries, forest administration, still it is not part of our education. So it is totally ignored. After independence also, what happened, Telangana armed struggle, very popular armed struggle has taken place in Telangana area, Telangana state of present Telangana state. So one Komaram Bhimu, he was the person who rallied the Gond community and all tribals of Adilabad district. He opposed the alienation of land. So through Patwaris and all those things, So the Gond Rajas also engaged Marathi Patwaris. So because Raja wants to collect the tax, some accountant is necessary. These accountants are Patwaris, Vatandaris, and all those people. They used to, tribals don't know all these things, So by mistake or by intentional, lands were given to non-tribals and all those things, So tribals started opposing. So this in Telangana movement, so it was so active in 1948. So later, this Telangana armed struggle was also suppressed, So some of the young people who participated in Telangana armed struggle, when Telangana armed struggle was subjugated, some of the young people went into the tribal areas. They started, armed struggle. So which they have given up, which was given up in Telangana area. These people migrated, young people. So popular names are Kondapalli Sitaramaya, Chandrapulla Reddy, Terminal Nagreddy, and all these are great people, So they went into tribal areas. They continued the armed struggle. So fighting with the government and all those things. So one of the famous movement in Andhra Pradesh is Srikakulam Revolt. Srikakulam Revolt, it went on, it is a Naxalite movement. All the armed struggles led by Naxal are called Naxalite movements. This Srikakulam movement, so this Srikakulam movement is a liberation movement. They named it as a liberation movement. They want to do away with the government administration and all those things. And they forced the revenue officers who came to settle the land to leave the area. So during the Srikakulam armed struggle, it was recorded by Anthropological Survey of India in a seminar. Articles were published in 1982. So that is tribal movements, tribal revolts and movements. So in that literature, they mentioned at the time of Srikakulam armed struggle, there were 13 militant squads. So rallying the tribals all over Andhra Pradesh, combined state of Andhra Pradesh. So all these people opposed the land survey and all those things. So then government has suppressed all the, engaged the police, deployed the police. They went ahead with the land settlement. So that land settlement by and large went in favor of non-tribals. So because tribals are not aware of all these things, and moreover police force is there, and all these militant leaders, so were against the land survey titles and all those things. That was the situation. So that was in 82. So at that point of time in Telangana, there was a movement, Indravelli movement, it is called Indravelli Rebellion. That was also led by these Naxalite movements. Naxalite movements in Andhra Pradesh, they are known as Raitu Kuli Sangham movements. Raitu Kuli Sangham means Rait is peasant and Kuli is laborer, and Sanghams. They named all these tribal these groups also Raitu Kuli Sanghams. So in Indravelli, while Indravelli rebellion was taking place, when it is suppressed, I was submitting my thesis on tribal folklore in Usmania University. Most of you know this Usmania University is the cradle of Naxalite movement. So I stayed in the hostel for 4 years, and every room has a student union affiliated to these armed movements. So that was the following, that was the emotions, So this movement was suppressed, Indravelli movement. Then I started inquiring, in a democracy, armed struggle, it is very difficult. Underground movement in a democracy is very difficult. So why people are ignoring this kind of understanding land records and all those things? Why that literacy is not introduced? We have a famous anthropologist, Hemendorf, who was engaged by the Nizam, ruler of Hyderabad, erstwhile ruler of Hyderabad, and he engaged with Hemendorf. Hemendorf introduced school training, teachers training centers, and all those things. but he did not introduce the literacy of land records and forest management systems. In that literacy, he was advisor of Nizam. He was in such a position, he can influence, because of their innocence, unaware of land records and all those things, but it went on. Nobody questioned, nobody asked, even when our famous chief minister N.T. Ramarao, when he abolished the Patwari system, Patwaris are village accountants, who maintain land records. When he abolished, no communist party, nobody asked, you introduced this land literacy in education at primary level, so that every person will know. He will be able to check when he become an adult, he will able to check the misuse of the local administration, against the tribals and other culture. Nobody asked. So then I was reading the literature of Mao, Lenin, and all these things because of my curiosity. I understood, this Mao Zedong of China, he introduced the barefoot doctor system. He introduced in primary level the literacy of land records, community. There used to be communes. The communes used to calculate the levy from the peasants, and so all this, whatever is necessary to deal with the state, that kind of education was introduced by Mao in primary level itself. Mao is against higher education. So he introduced this. Why this is not happened? So why this is not happening in India? Why Maoists are not taking up this barefoot doctor system, barefoot land surveyor system? And I was questioning in student organizations in Usmania University and elsewhere also. But because the pitch is very emotional. Everybody is against, and everybody wants to ventilate their anger, frustration, and all those things. So then I thought, so to demystification of all these things, so land records and all those things, I should take the lead. Then I started this NGO Shakti. So I went back to tribal area and I mobilized my students. By the time my students entered into intermediate degree and all those things. So with them I started Shakti. So because of my student following, all the officers, were after me to implement their programs, like cultivate fruit orchards and all those things, vocational training centers and all those things. So then I used to ask them, you give me land records and all those things. So I got access into land records. I developed an understanding into land records. My first litigation was against a plywood factory which is felling wild mango trees in the forest. So then I came to know what are felling rules, what are all those things. Within 3 years, I was arrested between, for removing liquor shops and all those things, because I have a lot of following. I was a famous teacher. And by the time I returned with my doctoral study, and all the officers are curious to know about tribal culture. Every evening, we used to have a sitting and discussing about tribal knowledge, all those things. So with that kind of direct and indirect support, so within 2-3 years, I was thorough with the administrative system of revenue, forest, and police. What is available, what is non-available, what are the conditions, what is summon and warrant, because I was arrested thrice, so I used to understand, whole process, within 3 years, I was able to. So then this movement expanded to West Godavari and common districts also. All my colleagues, started, so their career opportunities, I started them asking to take over the adjacent districts. And so with this knowledge, I asked them, you work in those districts, mobilize people, these are the land records. And fortunately, in land records, so in Andhra Pradesh, there is a protective legislation, the burden of proof is with the non-tribal. any non-tribal, who is having land, he has to prove that he did not purchase land from tribals. And even in Andhra Pradesh till today, in both the states of Andhra and Telangana, the land transfer is, there is no purchasing or selling of land. It is totally freezed in tribal areas. That is called 1/70 amendment to the Land Transfer Regulation Act. So that was the situation, and I used that situation and the goodwill with the officers. I got access into the records. All my colleagues, so used to thoroughly understand all those things. So they started, expanding the work to West Godavari and Khammam. So within 10 years, this became a very movement. So we used to go to the villages. Whatever records we are having, we used to read out in the villages. And somewhere, in some villages, the tribals were the grandfathers of the present generation. They were the Pattadars. But today tribals don't know. Their grandfathers were Pattadars. They have a memory, their grandfather used to cultivate certain piece of land. But they don't know his name is in the records. Nobody told them. I am the first person, fortunately, in Madras presidency, in 1930, government printed land records in Telugu, local language. So I used to take the records and tell your grandfather was Pattadar. His name is there in this record. If you are proud of your heritage, if you are Izzat ka sawal, you get the land. I used to encourage them. So I used to ask the officers, officer can solve one or two problems, not this kind of whole scale problems, it is very difficult for any officer. So because they stay for 3 years, 2 years and all those things, So it became a movement in West Godavari and Khammam districts. It became every village, used to ask for land records, go and grab the land and chase the non-tribals, bow and arrows. There are a number of thousands of criminal cases and all those things. We used to provide legal aid to the tribals. Tribals understand what is summon, what is warrant, and how to get bail. If it is a bailable offense, 2 sureties should be ready. And this is a general knowledge for the tribals. Tribals, if you are sent to jail, you will be fed properly and they will take care of you. And if it is a bailable offense, you can come back and on the same day. So this kind of confidence, we instilled a confidence among the tribals. It is not an end game. Once you are arrested, you have every right, to know and all those things. So the movement continued. At last, by the time, after 10 years, I'm very popular in secretariat. The sub-collectors, collectors, DFOs who worked with me, they became secretaries, joint secretaries in the secretariat. And they were in favor of me. Yeah, really, this is land records. We don't know people. When people don't know land records, we are also unable to help them. So now a movement has come demanding distribution of land records. We should support this movement. We should not brand this movement as an Naxalite movement. This movement is totally different. This movement is a right, demanding a right to participate in the administrative process, a informed participation. So that support, so after 2-3 years, in spite of that support, moral support, indirect, direct support, hundreds of cases, thousands of tribals were arrested. And when I was arrested in one village, tribals went to the police station, and the police vacated the police station, and the tribals went to the Tahsildar office and taken the Tahsildar office as a hostage and gave ultimatum to the government. If you don't release Shakti people, and your Tahsildar will be no more. And the government understood the mood of the people, and immediately by evening, they released me in the same village where we were arrested. So this happened several times, when there is abuse of power by police and whatever reasons, So that goodwill, constructively, and the people in the administration was very confident, okay, it is Shakti means they are thorough with the land records. They have these mistakes were committed since generations, now they are asking to rectify those mistakes. So then the government invited me to secretariat, all revenue officers, top officers, all tribal welfare officers. We entered into agreement and how to distribute land records in advance, how to conduct verification. That is a historical thing. In 97, the first time land records in India were distributed to the community in West Godavari and Khammam districts, and it became a movement. And but the tribals are first generation literates. To catch up with the speed of government, it is very difficult. Government, gives a certain time. Within 15 days, we want to finish this whole process. But the first time, tribals are exposed to land records, it takes time for them to understand, to stake claims, to counter the claims of non-tribals or lawyers working for them and all those things. But a beginning was made. Later, after some time, after 2-3 years, the government sent me to Srikakulam, the Maoist area, the Naxalite area. So designating me as a barefoot land problem surveyors to train barefoot land. So what Mao positively introduced, so that same designation was given to me. So the Rural Development Department asked my team to go to Srikakulam and train the tribals, in land records, cadastral maps, survey numbers, for reserve boundaries. That is the beginning of the participatory and understanding. And later government introduced, we have a Society for Elimination of Rural Poverty. It is known as Indira Kranti Patham. It was started by Rural Development Department in 2002. Chief Minister was the chairperson of that secretary. So in that SERP, they introduced, land surveyors. They trained the tribals in land survey. They engaged, they recruited some lawyers also. So though till today, the land records, land literacy, forest knowledge, forest management knowledge, and police knowledge is not part of primary education. Some beginning was made by government, to train the tribals as community surveyors and engage them for the benefit of people. But what happens, when anybody joins government, he works against community, because bureaucracy and government both are two sides of the coin. The elected government, so they want to status quo. They don't want to change the system, overnight. They want to disturb the system also. And bureaucracy also like that, they follow the same system. If people started asking questions, they don't like, bureaucracy, authoritarian. They think, people should beg them. So collector garu, varu, viru, and all these things. So what we have undone, and we have snatched their hold and monopoly on land records and forest management systems and all those things. So this work is going on. When government introduced, this kind of in 2006, the government of India introduced an act, that is a recognition of Forest Rights Act. So in that act, in that preamble, government has admitted it is a historical injustice not recording the tribal positions. So since generations, since colonial times, now we want to rectify that. We want to recognize the tribals' community uses and individual uses. So because at that point of time, the tribals, as I was telling in the beginning, tribal follow their customary boundaries. They have up to this point, this nala, this pahad is our area, and up to this area, this is a neighbor's area. They have their mental maps in their mind, they know, so where their boundary starts, where their boundary ends, and all those things. If there is any trespass, they will resolve. So the government of India wanted to revive the process of customary boundary and all those things. At that point of time, nobody knows what is customary boundary. They engaged me, so to train the officers and the community also to prepare the customary maps, to recognize, to identify the community uses and the biodiversity areas, rich areas, and all those things. That is going on. So that is how a armed struggle, a pre-independent movement, so which is ignored. The pre-independent movement, whether Gandhian movement or Naxalite movement, armed struggles, this kind of land literacy, understanding land records, understanding, deal with the state, how to engage the state, how to rectify the mistakes of the bureaucracy and at local level. And this beginning, I'm very fortunate I could made it. So everywhere this kind of movements should understanding land records. Now literacy is high, even in tribal areas, so everybody school dropouts are there. And if you see the qualification of education level of patwaris or forest guards, they are 10th class intermediate people only. It is not difficult to understand land records and the forest working plans or forest notifications. Only simple thing is we have to apply their mind. Nowadays, this thing is, nowadays the government wants to introduce GIS, GPS. And that is technology is penetrating, and we should understand. Otherwise, who is technologically superior, they will cheat more. So now we are training the tribals, in using GPS, 4G. In 4G, the cell phones, there is a mechanism, there is a tool to measure your land, to understand your land. You can report from your cell phone the complaint. But it is not popularized. Our Prime Minister says, minimum government, maximum governance. Maximum governance means everybody. So to ensure that everybody should understand the government systems, and the government also should cooperate them. And but ultimately, government or bureaucracy or those who are in position of the properties, they don't leave. They don't leave unless you force them to distribute knowledge, to share the knowledge. So this is my title, the presentation of my title says, tribal revolts, lessons to be learned to empower the tribals. This is the simple. So I made it very personal, but so in the sense, how we progress from one step to another, but this should go on. So, and now the problem all over the world is climate change. How to mitigate the impact of climate change, and how to bring down the 2 degrees Celsius, this heat, and all those things. For that, so the government, all the governments, under UNESCO leadership, they want to bring down 2 degrees Celsius down. They want to go to pre-industrial age. They want to minimize the intervention of the fossil fuel, use of fossil fuels, and all those things. To ensure that, we should go to pre-colonial area, and we should then pre-colonial systems, they are still prevalent among tribals. So this is the right opportunity for us to understand the tribal knowledge systems, tribal management systems, and whatever shortcomings are there, and we can rectify them, and forge a new partnership with the government, and in helping not only the tribal communities, not only the all over the world, this climate change, mitigation of all these things. Every time, a prime minister went to Paris, Glasgow, and all those things, he is promising to do many things. But that is possible when you involve the people by and large, introducing all the government systems, government tools of governance, which Jal Jangal Jamin, all these tools in the primary level itself. Then by the time a person becomes adult, he will be thorough with all these things. He will check. So it is observations, I conclude my presentation. I thanks once again all the panelists and particularly Nagbhushan Garu for giving me the opportunity and his introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Namaste. Actually, in my introduction today, I was already mentioning how pre-modern rulers were more friendly to the tribal communities, and tribal communities were less troubled during the pre-modern rule of what they called feudal kings, the medieval kings. With the introduction of colonial rule only, this literacy dominated administrative system entered, and the blind following of the colonial rules of land records, colonial rules of imposing the British methods and English methods of proof of land record, onus lying on the part of tribals rather than on non-tribals. All these were introduced by the British, and gradually, as Sivaramakrishna ji was rightly showing, gradually we are realizing those mistakes committed earlier, and through policy after policy, we are undoing the mistakes done by blindly following the British colonial policies of modernity. And as Sriram Krishna ji rightly pointed out, this is the worldwide dilemma with regard to forest dwelling communities, whether to allow them to learn modernity and help them to deal with the modern situation, or to preserve and conserve their traditional culture. Sivaram Krishna ji has taken the course that they should be educated about the modern situation, and we should help them to deal with modern predicament, the modern problems. So that he has practically been doing for decades. The entire Indian society has to be grateful to such barefoot workers, we should say, who are actually working on the ground. In behalf of the entire Indian society, grateful to you, sir, for your grand work, for bridging between the modern situation and the traditional situation of the forest dwelling communities, Vanavasi communities. Thank you very much, sir.